welcome to That Girl Speaks. Today is Friday, March 14th. I am Amy Beth. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. You can find me as the Fat Squirrel on Ravelry and on Blue Sky. Yes. Thanks for coming over. There's going to be probably more ambient noise than there typically is. That's because my window is open. What? I know that it's going to get cold in like a day and a half, but since we've talked, I have had cottage cheese and pineapple for dinner. That's a big sign of warming weather. And I've had my first iced coffee of the season. I know, New Englanders, I feel you judging me, but for me, iced coffee is seasonal. It's not in my actual veins. This is Gus. He's licking my wrist. There is no reason except that he is Gus. And he's special. He did get a haircut. Did you see him his haircut? Did you see him haircut? No, he doesn't want you to see him. He does not want to be perceived. Oh, yeah. But yeah, like, t-shirt on. I will be honest, I've been trying to be a little fancier when we visit lately. But today I really just needed this color to be in my life. And so it's a t-shirt day. Thanks for coming over on a t-shirt day. So yeah, let's get into it. This week's episode is going to have shameless self-promotion. It's going to have shenanigans, like actual in the world shenanigans. What? It's going to have it's going to have stitching. It's going to have crochet. It's going to have knitting, and it's going to have reading. So those are all the things we're going to talk about. Let's get into it. So, administrative stuff. Want to thank you to all the patrons of the podcast, and thank you to all the folks who've been keeping the Discord aloft as I took like a little bit of a break. Everybody here is healthy. Everybody is safe. There is no emergency, but sometimes life and relationships happen, and they're too much for my brain to take care of, and then also do anything else. So yes, thank you to the patrons, and thank you especially to the folks on Discord who have been continuing on. I mean, I'm a very minor character there. I am definitely an NPC in many cases. But I do just appreciate knowing that like no kerflufferiness will happen while I am gone, and that is a wonderful feeling. Because y'all take care of yourself, I hope. Because y'all deserve it. You really, really do. That's the sign out from Psychiatry in Seattle. At the end of each episode, he says, "And take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do." And boy, we do need to have that. At first, I was like, "This is kind of hokey," because that's like, isn't that 100% of like mental well-being stuff? Isn't it all? This is a little hokey. This seems kind of corny. It's interesting that like, trying to take care of ourselves and each other, and trying to be gentle with ourselves, and trying to be empathetic. It's interesting that all of those things often have, or at least in my history, have been labeled as corny or hokey and like worthy of dismissal. When we're definitely reaping some of those fruits. Okay, so I will say so I'm going to talk about shop update in just a second, but now that I've just said that, I do want to say, so in like what you're watching, too many YouTube videos, either about economic theory or how to calm your nervous system. That's my YouTube video history for these last 2 weeks. Just like Ezra Klein, therapy in a nutshell. Like, whatever those folks are who do stuff from The Wire. Like, it's just ridiculous. and I have always been a person who has been really fascinated by economics. Like, it is fascinating to me. It's so it's unfortunate that like I have fallen back into that interest as a result of being like, and it doesn't really feel like an interest in this moment. It feels just like some sort of scaffolding to like hold myself against in this hurricane, but whatever. But so, okay, so that was to say, one of the things I did really think was, okay, there's been so many things that have been interesting, but I've also had this period of like looking back at America. I feel like, you know, there's been so many times in my life with I've been jaded with, you know, and appropriately so in many cases, with things that we have done as a country. And at the same time been really proud of other things that we were doing, or at least we were trying to do. And I thought this quote was really like, just really kind of held in a couple of sentences that feeling. So Ezra Klein was interviewing Fareed Zakaria, and Fareed Zakaria said this: "The U.S. has always had two fundamental attitudes. We are too good to participate in the world, or we are so good that we should completely transform the world. But to actually engage in the world as it exists has always been difficult for the U.S. because it's an ideological nation." So yeah, so again, that's Fareed Zakaria. The U.S. has always had two fundamental attitudes. We are too good to participate in the world, or we are so good that we should completely transform the world. But to actually engage in the world as it exists has always been difficult for the U.S. because it's an ideological nation. So I thought that was a very interesting perspective. And I have definitely touched back on it several times during the week and sort of just like tried to like think about that encapsulation of a vibe has been, because again, like these attitudes are shaped by the collective. So the collective also shapes us, and just trying to like sort of like hold what that means to the foundation of who we are, how it has led to us being in this very precarious moment. So I don't know. So I just thought that was, I thought I would share with you in case it resonates with any of you. Okay, but there is one silly thing that I've been listening to, or that I did listen to, but I want to listen to more to. I don't even know how the algorithm gave this to me. Such a black box. But in this case, I appreciated it. But they served me this mashup between two podcasts, YouTube channels, what have you. One of them is Ghost Huns, so it's the word ghost is an Huns. And then the other podcast is Drunk Women Solving Crimes. And just four women with too much alcohol betwixt them to be doing a podcast. So much laughing that at times you're like, wait, I don't even know, like just in like a real conversation where you're like, how did we get here? So anyway, so that has been very enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to peppering that in to my content of economic theory and, nervous system calming techniques. But I did really enjoy it. Okay, but so then so shop update. So how I have to make the money so that I can do these things. I'm going to have a shop update Saturday, March 15th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. My website is fatsquirrelfibers.com. And I've been experimenting with these little tabbed drawstring bags for quite some time. And I have decided on one that I like, and I have made some for y'all. So they are my favorite bags, really. I really love them for socks and hats and like sort of one skein objects or projects, excuse me. So they are a tabbed drawstring. They are sometimes called a rice bag. But the great thing about them is they're a drawstring, but I love heavier fabrics. So this is like a cotton linen canvas. I do lots of denims, things like that. And those fabrics, when you try to do a drawstring with them, for me, I don't care for how it feels because the fabric is so dense that it doesn't scrunch up. And so your bag is sort of always like, sort of like half open because it's just too rigid to get it like completely cinched closed like you would if you were doing like a quilter's cotton bag. So I find that these are a great solution to that. So yeah, so here's the ones I'm having. So this again is a cotton linen canvas, and then I have it lined with an Essex linen. I believe this is pickle because, right? So good. So here you can see like a couple little socks in there just to give you an idea. Right? So I have her, and then I'll also have this little gal. And she again is a cotton linen canvas exterior. And then she is a sort of like rustic linen. So this is a heavier weight rustic linen. I think it's either 7 or 8 ounce. So it's got some heft to it. And so you can kind of see this. She has nothing in her. She doesn't really stand up on her own, but you know, again, you can kind of get an idea. This lining is even thinner than this one, and she does do a pretty good job. And then, of course, the little the drawstrings for this round. I don't know if this will be permanent, but for this round, is this fun little measuring tape twill tape. So it's a little heavier than like most twill tapes I've been able to source, which has kind of been another stopping point for me. But she's a little bit heavier than a lot of those, and I think that I've used it in a bag that I've been using for at least 3 months, and it's still got body. It doesn't feel like it's getting like worn out or like, you know, what have you. So I think that they're going to be good for you. I'm pretty confident about them, which is one of the reasons it takes me 100 years to do anything. So you might notice these gals have just like the standard square bottom without any sort of it's just a square sewn on. And then these gals have like a traditional boxed corner option. So these girls take a lot more fabric. So I want to do these in many ways. But they don't lay as flat and look as nice when they're not being used. Just such a silly reason to be like, I'm gonna go with this because it's the best zero waste option. I mean, it is almost the way I have kind of configured them. It is almost zero waste if I do them with this configuration. So yeah, I think that's what we're gonna do. Even though they look a little bit like not perfectly flat. I know you're not gonna like care, but I care. So anyway, so those are gonna be up Saturday, March 15th, 9 p.m. Eastern, fatsquirrelfibers.com. And then in Shenanigans, oh my gosh, yo. So I had a really bad day on Thursday, and I had signed up for a class. Every year, the Bloomington Quilters Guild. So Bloomington is almost an hour south of me. Bloomington Quilters Guild has a quilt show every spring, and they have classes. They have a lot of instructors. Like I think there's usually like 4 or 5 instructors and 3 days of classes. They have a quilt show that they host. It's like a traveling quilt show. They'll have like a featured artist, and then they also have some local vendors there, like Crimson Tate, which is my localist quilt store, is there, and other folks in the area. And other people too, like they have like the Thimble Lady was there this year, so she's not from here, but she's not from here. But anyway, it's always such a good show. And last year I took a class on big stitch quilting, which I'm so glad I took. And this year my friend Malia was, she reminded me that the class that it was coming up, because I really need handlers. I'm so thankful for the handlers in my life. She reminded me this coming up, and she was going to take an embroidery class with beads. And originally I thought, I don't know if I'm really a bead person. Like, do I really want to take an embroidery class with beads? Like, I'm not sure that's the vibe I'm going for. But there were folks in the class that I've really enjoyed, and I looked at the instructors' other classes and I thought, well, you know, maybe I'll just give it a try. And then on Thursday, I had a really, really bad day. The class was on Friday, and I was just like it was definitely like a, oh, how am I gonna like function in the world tomorrow? But I am so glad I did. I am so glad I did. The quilt show was always, it's always so awesome. There's show pieces that come in, like traveling pieces, but there's also pieces from the local guild. This year, their featured artist was Sue Cortez, and she does shibori techniques, hand-dyed and printed fabric. And there were probably, I don't know, maybe 10-ish quilt pieces there, like wall hanging size. I think maybe she had one larger, but anyway, they were just, I'll put a link in the show notes, in the drop down that's just right there. I'll put a link there. They were, I could have just looked at those quilts forever. Like, the dyeing techniques, they were all indigo, the ones that were there. They might have had a few like non-indigo dyes that were just like, but very sparsely. The overall theme was definitely white fabric, indigo dyeing techniques. And then like very abstract, again, like the actual like tied dyeing technique, like the shibori technique became like the piecedness of a quilt. So that was like, they were, I think most of them were whole cloth, but lots of them did have sort of like insets and inlays, but like the overall impression was like a whole cloth vibe. They're just gorgeous. She had all sorts of different quilting techniques. Some of them were machine quilted. Lots of them were hand quilted with, I'm not sure if it was just, it seemed like thicker than regular quilting thread, but like not, definitely like not a number 8 pearl cotton. Maybe that's what a 12 pearl cotton looks like when you quilt it really tiny. I'm not sure, but they were gorgeous. Just gorgeous. And I don't know that I was inspired by them, because I don't know that I would ever try that sort of like technique. I mean, I guess I wasn't like inspired to make something like that, but they were just so beautiful and so inspiring, and like a sort of just like grounded, like almost like a, so woo, but like kind of like in like a spiritual way. Like there was just like beautiful movement in them between the dyeing and the stitching, and I don't know, they just really were a balm. And I was just so appreciative of her and all the other artists who exhibited, because it was just, what was I listening to today that she said, or the person said, that there's a reason. Oh, that was, no, I don't know. Okay, maybe it's Under the Desk News, from which she was talking about her salon with Glorious Dynam. I think that's where I heard it from. But anyway, so amongst that, she said something about, like, she's quoting somebody else. She said that, you know, there's a reason that solitary confinement is like the most extreme punishment, like legal punishment, and that actually it has to be limited because it is too damaging to the self. And it's hard when you're a person who does find so much safety. I think I would normally have said comfort, but I'm 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 almost wondering if it's safety that I feel in my solitude, right? When you're a person who's very attached to that safety, like being in the world is like overwhelming stimulation wise. Like, oh my lord, my husband is retired, and just the change in the like soundscape of my house is enough to make me seek like chemical interventions. Not really, but it's a lot. Like, and I didn't really understand how much it would sort of fray me. It's something I'm working on. Oh, so this guy got off track with that one. Okay, so like when you're a person, again, I'm recognizing that maybe solitude is safe for me. And like, yes, I think I'm predisposed to it, but I think I have taken it to a sort of extreme bubble wrap phase. And so thinking about that, like thinking about the solitary confinement, and I'm not comparing me choosing to be by myself with solitary confinement being chosen for someone. I don't mean to make that equation in any way. It's more just thinking about like the parallel between forced isolation and self-isolation, and like and just how to navigate that, I guess, has definitely been something on my mind lately. So it's hard to find that sort of like community feeling. But sometimes you get it just from like, I don't even know that I was like interacting in the community in those moments where I just felt like a kinship that felt like a soft place. So like, I need to remember that community doesn't always look the same for everybody, and that like I can't conceive of a place where I would just like be amongst humans so much more, but also like trying to find the balance between like overwhelm, but also being able to have access to those moments of feeling like, you know. So I hadn't really planned on talking about that, but it's been in my mindscape, so there you go. Okay, so that was talking about the artist Sue Cortez. And then my class was by Catherine Redford, and she teaches lots of different stitching classes. She teaches embroidery classes. She teaches, I believe she said she teaches hand quilting classes. She teaches walking foot classes, like quilting walking foot, and lots of other things like in that sort of sphere. And I really enjoyed her class so much. The morning, and I have done lots of embroidery, so that was like the other reason I was sort of hesitant of like, well, I've done a lot of embroidery, and like I feel very comfortable looking at stitch guides and following along with how to do something. But the great thing about the class was it was also about like combining those embroidery stitches, like even something, she has a technique that I probably have seen before, but I've never like registered before, where she combines, what is that called? Is that called yeah, okay, so that's right, that's what it was. Where she combines rows of buttonhole stitches into sort of this like very organic sort of like tortoise shell scale texture, which was really interesting. And so like that's kind of what I mean when I'm saying about like combining stitches, is that sort of idea of like, okay, yeah, I know all the stitches and I can follow, like if I'm given a pattern, but like what if I want to like freestyle? Like how do I sort of combine the things I know to get a texture that I want or that I enjoy stitching? Because that's a big part of it for me, is I need to enjoy the process of it. But yeah, you can definitely see, like even on the cover, this is her self-published stitch guide. I believe so. She's CatherineRedford.com, and it's Catherine with a C. But like just these like really great textures. And this is all just chain stitch. She did a lot of like augmented chain stitch that was really interesting. So the morning class, this is all day class. The morning was sort of like just like the traditional like embroidery stuff, like, and then in the afternoon we talked about beading. So I'll just show you my samples. They're just little samples, you know, they're swatches. But so the morning we talked about the chain stitch a lot. We talked about, what's that like feather one? You know what, there were several that we talked about, but we were just sort of like stitching as she was talking. And then we were doing like these sort of like augmented chain stitches where you thread your floss or your string through them. And this is sort of like that little buttonhole stitch that's sort of worked into like a little, but anyway, so there was that. And then in the afternoon we did the beading. We talked about several different ways to like, you know, like anything from just like a scatter of beads to different techniques of, you know, spacing them to like having them as like an outline and doing like a couching a technique. And then we did like different borders. So I did different borders, like a little like peacoat-y kind of border, and then this little fun guy, and then like some like even crazier ones. And you don't have to do them on a border. You can do them like in a like on a quilted line or a transition line. Then we did like this little guy. This does have to be on an edge, but this little sort of like wrapped guy. Anyway, it was very enjoyable. And she also has a book called Butterfly Stitches, which I was so excited that my library has. So actually it's waiting for me, but I was afraid if I left the house that I wouldn't do my recording when I needed to. So, but like that's a treat for the weekend. I'm excited about. And again, that book is called Butterfly Stitches. So she had lots of samples of her work. Just like really cool combinations of machine stitching and hand stitching. Like she had this one piece that, oh, it's actually pictured in the back of this book. Yeah, she had this one piece that's all paisleys, but in this square, so this square is black, and the lighter colored stitching is big stitch stitching, right? Like it's a big stitch. But it was so interesting because it was like raised looking. And I was like, how? It had a lot more dimension than I could kind of understand before I actually looked at it and she told us about it. What she's done is she's actually done machine stitching between those lines, or she's done machine stitching in black, so you don't see that stitching. And then she's done that running stitch, that big stitch in between rows of machine stitching, and it was just like such a dramatic texture. And it's just interesting because, like, I think if you had shown me her work, I would not be drawn to this. Like, I don't love these colors. I don't love this, like, sort of like intense coverage embroidery. That's not the right word, but like, I don't know. I just don't think I would be like, yes, that's what But seeing it in person and seeing like the different textures and hearing her talk about the why of some of the things she did. So here's one of the butterflies so that you can see the why of some of the things she did. So you can see like the beads all around this edging. You've got like fun embroidery techniques within. I think this one is a wool applique. But seeing the actual textures and the depth of what she was doing and then hearing her talk about it was like it was just really great. I really enjoyed it, and I am so glad that my handler was like, yeah, I'm taking this class. So yeah, it was really cool. And she is originally from England, so her accent also just was like really nice in that day. I don't know why that's, maybe I don't even know that I really watched a lot of like English movies when I was a kid. Like I wonder why that feels so comforting in many ways. I don't quite understand where that, because it's not like just something I enjoy. It feels very comforting in many ways, an English accent, like lots of different English accents for some reason, but they just feel very comforting to me. It might also be because they are sort of like Appalachian-y, like especially when you get into like the Scots and stuff, like there is a lot of tied Appalachian accents, and so maybe that's part of it, is it just feels like a deeper truth of that Appalachian accent that is like a big, like was a part of my childhood. I don't know. But it was enjoyable. Okay, and that is Shenanigans. Oh, okay, I will show you one thing I bought because it's so pretty. Oh, this is the only thing I bought. I really have been trying not to buy quilting fabric because I have a lot of it and I have a very small house. But sometimes I fall down. And like, this new colorway set from, this is by, I believe Fabulism is the manufacturer. I purchased this from Crimson Tate, and I have seen so Fabulism uses a lot of the same weaving techniques in different colorways. So as you can see, like this is not a printed quilter's cotton. This is a woven technique. I know all quilter's cotton is also woven, but it's like more dimensionally woven. And you have, I apologize for I can't see me and see you unless this happens. And like, so there's like this really wild technique or texture. I tell you what, so I'm sorry, I won't try to focus on them because it's tedious, but so enjoyable. So I purchased these, and I am sort of at this point deciding between doing like a small quilt, like a wall hanging-y, or maybe even a throw. That's possible. Or what I think I'm really leaning towards is a pieced like jacket. I think the Hope jacket from Helen's Closet, or my beautiful jacket from Muna and Broad. I don't know. That's sort of a possibility. Like an open, I say jacket, I don't mean like a structured jacket. Like it's like an open sort of like cloth cardigan or woven cardigan. But for now, I'm just gonna look at them because they're very attractive. So then in stitching, I have made progress. So this is not done, but it's sort of like in a done phase of my Violet Craft English paper piecing project. So she is all pieced, but she is not yet quilted. Right. So the owl itself is some wovens that my mom gave me a few years ago for Christmas. And the background is a combination of a hand-dyed fabrics. Well, they're all hand-dyed fabrics. Some of them were hand-dyed professionally by another human, and then some of them were dyed by me. So I purchased these when we were on a quilting or like a crafting retreat with friends at a place in Paducah. And then while we were at the crafting retreat, we did some ice dyeing. So these ones that are like wackadoodle, that are not solids in there, are actually ones that I dyed while we were hanging out. So yeah, so I'm so pleased with it so far. And now I mean, it's imperfect, 100%, but mostly it's pretty good. There's only a few seams that didn't quite work out right. In terms of just like, well, whatever, they just didn't quite match up. So there's a few little fudgy places, but so now I have to decide how to actually quilt it. And I'm definitely a stopping place. This sample originally was shown with just horizontal lines of machine quilting. So I love just a line machine quilted. I'm never gonna, well, at this point, I don't imagine that I will be a person who does a lot of like free motion quilting. That does not appeal to me to learn that technique at this point. So I definitely would do like, if it's gonna be a machine quilt, it would definitely be like a walking foot options, which is like straight lines, as far as I understand them. Or I could do like a hand quilting or something. I don't think I want to do big stitch because I think it'll really like, I think this like the standout is the actual like pieced item. And so I don't know that I want to do big stitch, because in my head it seems like it might kind of like distract from that. I don't know. But I could also do some hand quilting, or I could do a combination of both. So I am in a pausing place until I can figure that out. But there she is. Right. Oh, and I'm also trying to decide what she'll be, because that might also influence my decision. Will she be like a wall hanging, or will she be a pillow cover? I haven't decided. I do kind of have a wall of bird art. Like I have some crewel embroideries that I did years and years ago. I actually have a lino cut from when I was in high school that we embossed the lino cut. This is the motion for embossing, y'all. Like we embossed the lino cuts, and then like I was so extra, y'all. So extra. But I spray painted mine gold and then used like this winey purple, plummy purple, eggplanty kind of purple. A little bit redder than okay, I'm just giving you too much specifics. And then I like washed that on top of it and then wiped off the relieved surfaces. That was so extra. But it was like something like I never felt comfortable in art class. I didn't take my art class until I was a senior. Like it was something that's, so when I actually made something that I liked, I was like fully committed. Anyway, so I have a wall of like sort of bird art. So I don't know, she might end up there, or she might end up as a pillow. But yeah, so that's my stitching. And then in crochet, I have a new project. A while back, I finished some hand spun with fiber dyed by the beautiful Oink Pigments folks. And I love this color. But I don't even know what we call this color, but I dig it. And for some reason, I really needed these things to live together. So this is a boucle from Knit Picks. I think it's called Bouncy Boucle, if I'm not mistaken. And I think this is like fizzy lemonade. I'm not sure. But I bought a skein of it because I was just weirdly enamored with it. Like this is not, whatever. It's not weird. I mean, it's kind of weird, but like, it's not my normal vibe, but like, also, so then these two, I originally bought it because I thought I would use it with white in like a weird shawl thing that I saw, not weird, a shawl pattern that I saw, but then like whatever, that became something else. And so then she was just sitting there on the shelf, and then this came, and I was like, for some reason these need to go together in my life. So I found a crochet pattern, and that pattern is called the Scorpio Cowl, and it's by Crochet Highway. It calls for 2 skeins of DK, and it's this interlocking crochet technique. Okay, so I just have a little baby start. Okay, y'all. And then this is the inside. Look at her! Look at her! She's a waffle of sunshine with blue skies poking through. What is even happening? So I'm crocheting mine. Sorry, that's quite loud. I think I was using a G hook, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, and I really do like these little prim crochet hooks quite a lot. They feel very good in my hand. I carried it up in my mouth and it's got lipstick on it. I don't ever wear lipstick. I only wear lipstick for y'all because I kind of look a little extra corpsey in this medium without it. So I don't know how to function with it, which is often why I go back to edit and realize I've got lipstick on my teeth. I just found a mistake, y'all. It's okay. It's not a bad mistake. Here, I'll show you. See right here? She's missing her arm, but that's okay. That's not terrible. I can live with that. Because, oh my God, I can't tell you how long it's been since I have had to take something apart. I think I had to take it fully apart like 4 times. I was telling Leslie from the Knit Girls, it's like, you know, when you're learning to spin and you watch for somebody, like for example, like somebody chain plying, and there is like, you can watch them and you really think you know what they're doing. But then you go to do it and you realize that there is something magical and witchy that happened that is apparently invisible to you. And so that is really the experience I had with this interlocking crochet technique. So at first I thought, okay, maybe it's because I'm using this boucle and like it's just too confusing and of course it's also boucle because like, hello, clearly I should start a technique that I've never done before and then use boucle because that's not going to cause any problems. So like, it's a pain to rip out. I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. Like if you've never used it, it's ridiculous. It's almost impossible. Well, it's very difficult to rip out. Like I wasted some yarn. So I watched her. It's not the pattern's fault. Let me just reiterate, it is not the pattern's fault. She has a lot of photographs of in the pattern. She has a video, but unfortunately the only video I could find of this specific technique, of this specific stitch, was a video she put out where she's working it flat, because she also has a sweater pattern and I want to say a hat pattern. I think what she does is she's trying to show you how to do the gauge swatch, and so it's flat. And I am not experienced enough with crochet. Like if you showed me a knitting thing and it was knit flat and then you told me to do it in the round, it might take me a second, but like I feel very confident I can figure it out, you know. This, however, I was just like, she's clearly doing something different, because what she's producing is very different than what I am producing. But I think I'm doing the exact same thing she's doing, but I'm clearly not. But I can't see where I am doing something different. You know what I mean? So it was very frustrating. That said, I'm really pleased with how it's turning out. And it's not at all, like once I figured out the missing like click, I was like, oh, and it doesn't feel tedious. It doesn't feel, there's a very short row repeat that is very intuitive once you like realize what's supposed to be happening. But yeah, I'm really digging it. So it is kind of small. So I'm just looking at it being like, but I did put it on, and like I did want it to be a sort of like shorter cowl, not like a smaller circumference cowl, because I do like it when they just sort of like stand up, but then also sort of stand up here and not just fold down. So that's, I think it's going to work really well for me. But oh man, it's so cute. I'm so pleased with myself. So again, that is the Scorpio cowl by Crochet Hideaway. Okay, so then in knitting, I have finished my Wild Winds vest by Wild Knits of Glasgow. But she's in a timeout until I can exactly figure out how I want to seam up the sides. I seamed up the sides, and I can't tell at this point if I'm just needing to find the right way to style it, or if I need to refigure out how I'm seaming up the sides. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway, so she's a little bit of timeout, not like in a bad way, just in like a, I need to think about you kind of way. Just like the owl, just to think about you. So she's in a break. I also have another project that's in a, well, she's not in a break, she's broken up with. Last time I showed you my cute little sock. And this is the pattern. And this is from the book Joyful Colorwork Socks by Charlotte Stone. And I was working with Opal solids, and I just wasn't loving the fabric that I was getting. So I sort of put her aside and thought, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Some people suggested blocking, which is a great idea, to see if it would like plump up enough to make me feel comfortable with the size, or to make me feel comfortable with the fabric I was getting. But so I was like, well, and I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe what I could do is knit them as like a DK sock. So just hold all the yarn double and like make like a house sock. Okay. So it's like, well, maybe that would be what I like. And so I cast on and knit up. I changed the border a little bit because it didn't really work with this, using this as like a marl. So I just held the skein of brown with the skein of white here. They just held them double with the same color. And so I do think it's cute, but it does not fit on my foot. Well, it fits on my foot. It doesn't fit around my ankle because I think, well, whatever. It just doesn't. And also I wasn't even sure that I really liked it that much anyway. And so she, I think, is no more. I think I'm just gonna, I think it's probably that I really don't like these colors. I don't love this yarn. I love the opal sock yarn that's like the printed, the color, the dyed, funny dyed opal yarn, but I just don't really like these solids at this point. And then I also don't like these colors that much. I got them because they worked with like the sock that I was knitting, I was going to knit, but I don't really love them individually. And so it's just not, it's not sparking the joy. So yeah, this is definitely not going to go any further. And I'm just deciding whether or not I might just use these to knit a pair of DK socks that are marled like this, or I might put them in the like the donation hat bin, because I think this would, it's superwash and held double. I think it would make a pretty good hat for. So then in what I'm reading, I'm going to talk about 3 books that I finished since we talked about last time. The first one is The Wedding People by Alison Espach. Sorry, I don't know why I said Alison. I did it again. Alison Espach. And so here is the description of that one. It's a beautiful day in Newport, Rhode Island when Phoebe Stone arrives at the Grand Cornwall Inn wearing a green dress and gold heels, not a bag in sight, alone. She's immediately mistaken by everyone in the lobby for one of the wedding people, but she's actually the only guest at the Cornwall who isn't here for the big event. Phoebe is here because she's dreamt of coming for years. She hoped to shuck oysters and take sunset sails with her husband, only now she's here without him. Meanwhile, the bride has accounted for every detail and every possible disaster the weekend might yield, except for, well, Phoebe, which makes it that much more surprising when the women can't stop confiding in each other. I really enjoyed this one. I listened to this on audiobook from my library, and rather than giving it like a star rating, I will just say that I want to listen to it again. It was in my library holds queue, so I won't be able to listen to it again right away, but I definitely want to listen to it again because I think it was a very thoughtful book. It's like it sort of like had, what was that Eleanor Oliphant book? I can't remember anyway, it was Eleanor Oliphant. It sort of has that like messy main character that is just trying to figure out what is going on. Like, what is this life? Like, what is it in all of its like just chaos and so I guess it's just she is a Victorian lit professor. The main character is a Victorian literature professor, which I also really enjoyed. It has like some fun little like quippiness about like her knowing like weird etymologies and stuff like that, which was very enjoyable. And she's dealing with a pretty deep depression, and a lifelong depression. And some of the characters are just a little bit like Dorito-y. Like they're a little bit like more than would be natural. You know what I mean? Or that like would just like a little bit more. But at least the author, I think, does do some service to like trying to give them like a motivation of some sort. It's not just that they're like pantomimes without some sort of like understanding of why maybe their expressions and actions are so exaggerated. There's lots of like really absurd situations that happen, so they kind of have like just like is like a questioning of like, you might have a question of like, really, but it never felt egregious. Like it never felt like, what, because that's, it never felt like that. But I think I would definitely like to reread it because I think there was more to be found in it than I actually got off the first reading. Because I think the first reading, what came out more was moments of introspection, but a lot of like the humor and the absurdity of it sort of is like that top level that I just sort of skimmed off, but there's definitely more underneath that I would like to think about. I think this would be, because of that, I think this would be a good book to read with a friend or with a group of people, because I definitely think it deals with heavy topics, but in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. Like it doesn't, it feels like you could talk about them without it just being like the most Debbie Downerist time of all. So yeah, that is The Wedding People by Alison Esbach. Okay, so then for a vibe shift, I also finished reading A Psalm of the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. It's the first entry in the Monk and Robot series. I think there are 2 of them. This is the first one I've read, and I don't know if there's going to be more, if it's just a 2-part series. So here's the description. It's been centuries since the robots of Panga gained self-awareness and laid down their tools. Centuries since they wandered en masse into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Centuries since they faded into myth and urban legend. One day the life of a tea monk is upended by the arrival of a robot, there to honor the old promise of checking in. The robot cannot go back until the question of what do people need is answered. But the answer to that question depends on who you ask and how. They're going to need to ask it a lot. Becky Chambers' new series asks, in a world where people have what they want, does having more matter? In a world where people have what they want, does having more matter? This, very enjoyable. Highly recommend. Another one that I will definitely be, I listened to it, I don't know if I said that, I listened to this from my library, but I would definitely be tempted to read it in physical form as well. And in fact, that might be how I do my second consumption of it. Again, like just to get that deeper layer that I'm not always great at getting on the first pass. But there's lots of reflections about. So this was called, what did they call, solar punk, which I had never heard of. But it's sort of like not what is not dystopia, but whatever. It's a futuristic novel where humanity made a good choice, which is also something that's nice to think about in these times. So yeah, it's like, you know, sort of like a buddy film, not really, but Moscap is the robot and Dex is the person, and he's a monk, and they sort of have, adventure is too strong of a word, but they have a journey. And it's just really wonderful to have that robot reflection on these, what we think of as these very human questions, these very sort of like subjective rather than objective things, and these things that feel like, you know, they're messy and they're fleshy and they're a ball of stuff, you know, like, and so it's really nice to have this sort of like kind, sort of objective reflection of that mess. Yeah, another one that I think would be really fun to read with a group or with just another person, so that you could sort of talk about some of those themes that, yeah. It definitely felt, it was like introspective. It was introspective, but very gentle. It was cozy, but not simplistic. Like, there was world building, even though it was a very short, I think it's maybe a novella, I'm not sure. But it was fairly short, but there was still world building that I found interesting, and sufficient for where we were. I didn't have like big questions of what wasn't contained in the world building. Like, it was just enough to give some sort of groundwork to the actual meat of it. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. A Psalm of the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. So then another vibe shift, I read A Well-Trained Wife, My Escape from Christian Patriarchy by Tia Levings. And this is a memoir, and I did also listen to this one on audiobook from my library. So here's the synopsis. Recruited into the fundamentalist quiverful movement as a young wife, Tia Levings learns that being a good Christian meant following a list of additional life principles, a series of secret, special rules to obey. Being a godly and submissive wife in Christian patriarchy included strict discipline, isolation, and an alternative lifestyle that appeared wholesome to outsiders. Women were to be silent, keepers of the home. Tia knew that to their neighbors her family was strange, but she also couldn't risk exposing their secret lifestyle to police, doctors, teachers, or anyone outside their church. Christians were called in Scripture to be in the world, not of it. So she hid in plain sight as years of abuse and pain followed. When Tia realized she was the only one who could protect her children from becoming the next generation of patriarchal men and submissive women, she began to resist and question how they lived. But in the patriarchy, a woman with opinions is in danger, and eventually Tia faced an urgent and extreme choice: stay and face dire consequences, or flee with her children. So definite like domestic and sexual violence warnings, not on what I'm going to talk about, but if that's something that you find difficult to cope with, this is probably not a good choice for you. It was hard to witness. I found myself at times, I did listen to this on audiobook, and I found myself at times being like, why am I doing this? Like, sometimes you stop a book because you're just like, I'm not into this storyline, or not into these characters, or like, I'm not into this writing style. But I really had a moment of just like, I don't know if I want to do this to myself, which is not something that I feel very often when I'm reading a book. And I mean that just from the literal, like the word we use probably is unflinching descriptions of the abuse and the like entrapment of self and spirit in this like just this vile sort of real bad place. And so I just had moments of just like, I don't know if I really want to do this to myself, which is an unusual feeling for me when I'm reading a book. But I did continue to listen to it. And by the way, when I say that it's hard, it's not because I think the author did a really great job in terms of like writing her narrative. It was just really challenging to move through. It's very like personal. And we watched a documentary about IBLP or like similar systems of oppression. We don't get the like in the room view, right? Like we get like, oh, that is a bad system for women. That's a bad system for men. That is a bad system for people. Like we get like that, but we're like in the room with how bad it can be, and it's really hard. So I think, you know, if somebody were interested in like even a memoir about somebody in one of these extreme control groups, this would definitely not be the first one I would recommend, because it's pretty rough. And that's not to say that it was like, it's not like every inch of it was rough. Don't get me wrong. It was just the places that it was rough were real rough. So again, and that's rough to move through, not rough writing or anything like that. And it's not just IBL, it's not just the Goddard thing. It's also other weird, I shouldn't say weird, also other high control things that are sort of like adjacent to it, but not, that I didn't even know about. And I don't want to know. No, it's just, you know, I really hope, I hope that this is like that, the death throes of misogyny, right? Like this is the death throes of that toxic framework that people are just really holding on to because they just don't, they're afraid of what else there might be, and they're just terrified, and so they're just like doubling down. And so yeah, it's probably just also really hard to read right now, when it feels, yeah, it's gross. This is really gross. So that's, I will say, one of the nice things I had about the nice moments I had about it, I had while I was reading it, was she at some point starts to visit a Christian Orthodox church, and I didn't really know about Christian Orthodoxy at all, and I still don't know. I mean, I don't think I'd ever heard of them. But I read a book not too long ago, which I now can't remember the name of, but it was a memoir about an adopted woman whose parents were part of a Christian Orthodox church, and this church also had a very similar, the way she wrote about it, even though it's a totally different region of, like, definitely different region of the country, even, like, it had like a lot of the sort of the gentleness and the like comfort of it felt very similar in those two narratives. The community of it felt very similar, and so like that was a really nice window into something. And that also just sort of like gave me something to sort of reflect on. And like I'm not gonna lie, I had a moment of like, do I just become a nun? You know, godless heathen to nun pathway is pretty short, right? And then I was like, oh no, wait, I can't take my dog. Yeah, I just really need the commune. Hi, vey. So yeah, so that was A Well-Trained Wife by Tia Levings. So thank you so much for hanging out. I really appreciate your company. Gus did too. He's right here. He doesn't like to be perceived sometimes. He's the most gregarious little fellow, but somehow as soon as I hold him to a camera, he's like, no. I should not have ended on that book because now I feel like I'm grasping at nice, not nice things. I'm grasping at something to end on. So yeah, I'll just totally copy Psychology in Seattle and say, take care of yourself because you deserve it.